What happens when a child, barely old enough to hold a rake, tests the very man who holds his future? The answer was a truth no one expected. The iron gates of the Harlow estate creaked open with a sound that made Ethan Carter's tiny hands grip his mother's palm even tighter. The morning sun glared off the polished black limousine parked near the driveway, and for a moment, the 7-year-old boy thought he had stepped into a world that only existed on television. The hedges were cut into perfect shapes, the driveway spotless, the marble pillars towering like giants. It was the kind of place where most people stopped to take pictures. But today, Ethan wasn't here to admire it. He was here to work. Monica Carter, his mother, glanced down at him nervously. She was only 32, but the exhaustion of double shifts and bills had carved lines across her face that didn't belong on someone so young. Clutching a small duffel bag with gardening tools that looked far too big for her son, she whispered, "Remember, Ethan, do exactly what Mr. Harlow says. Keep your head down and don't talk back. This job that matters." Ethan nodded. His small frame barely filled out the oversized work shirt Monica had thrifted for him, sleeves rolled 3 times, just to free his hands. He looked like a child playing dress-up, except there was nothing playful about the weight on his shoulders. His father was gone, taken by a sudden illness 2 years earlier, and every dollar mattered. As they stepped onto the stone path, voices from across the street floated over. 2 well-dressed women walking their golden retrievers slowed their pace, whispering just loud enough. "Is that a child with gardening tools?" one of them scoffed. "Honestly, what kind of billionaire hires a kid? Must be desperate or crazy." Ethan's ears burned, but he kept walking. His mother's grip tightened, silently shielding him from words that cut deeper than they should. The boy's small sneakers tapped against the flawless stone as they approached the towering front doors. For the first time, Ethan realized how tiny he looked against everything here. The mansion loomed like a castle, and he was just a speck of dust on its lawn. The door opened, and a tall man in a crisp suit appeared. Richard Harlow. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his presence commanding yet unreadable. He looked down at Ethan, then at Monica, and for a fleeting second, something strange flickered in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe even recognition, but it disappeared just as quickly. "This is your gardener," one of the neighbors murmured in disbelief from behind the gates. Ethan felt his chest tighten. His fists clenched around the handle of the rake, poking out of his bag. He wanted to prove them wrong. He wanted to show them that small hands could do big work. But the question lingered in the air like a shadow. Why would a billionaire even let a 7-year-old work in his yard? Richard Harlow didn't need to say a word to command attention. His presence did all the work. Standing at 6'3", dressed in a tailored navy suit even inside his own home, he carried the air of someone who had long grown used to people waiting for his approval before taking a single step. His eyes were a sharp gray, cool and unflinching, like steel polished too many times. Most people saw him as cold, untouchable. Some called him ruthless. Ethan, clutching the strap of his tool bag, had never felt smaller. He tilted his head up to meet Richard's gaze, his lips trembling but pressed together tightly. Monica started to speak, but Richard lifted a hand slightly, silencing her without even looking. His focus was on Ethan. "Why are you working?" Richard's voice was deep, clipped, almost clinical. The boy swallowed hard. He could have said 100 things, that he wanted money for candy, that he liked the outdoors, or that his mom made him. But Ethan, with a kind of innocence that cut straight through the marble air of the mansion, answered differently. "My mom works really hard," Ethan said, his voice small but steady. "She gets tired. I don't want her to do everything alone. I can help. Even if I'm just a kid, I can work." For a fraction of a second, the billionaire's face shifted. It wasn't a smile, not even a softening, just a flicker, like a light bulb testing its glow. Richard Harlow had built his empire on strength, dominance, and a refusal to show weakness. Yet here was a child, staring him in the eye, speaking words that echoed somewhere deep in the chambers of a life Richard had long buried. Monica shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Harlow, he won't be any trouble." But Richard interrupted, his gaze still fixed on Ethan. "Do you know what it means to work?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. It means you don't stop when you're tired. You stop when the job is done. The housekeeper, Clara, who had been standing in the hall, nearly dropped the silver tray in her hands. The words were too sharp, too practiced, for a child his age. But Richard's eyes narrowed. He leaned down slightly, meeting Ethan's gaze head-on. "You respect the work?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied without hesitation. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Something unspoken passed between the man and the boy. Richard straightened, pulling his jacket sleeve into place. His voice, though still sharp, carried a strange undercurrent now. "Then show me." It was a test, not of gardening, but of character. And though Ethan didn't know it yet, Richard Harlow saw something in him that reminded him of a boy he once was. A boy who had once stood with empty pockets, small hands, and a fire in his chest to prove the world wrong. The suspense hung in the air. What exactly had Richard recognized in Ethan's answer? And why did it stir something he thought he had buried long ago? The Carter apartment couldn't have been more different from the Harlow estate. Where Richard's mansion had sprawling lawns and chandeliers, Monica and Ethan's two-bedroom rental sat in a peeling brick building at the corner of a busy Bronx street. The hallway smelled faintly of fried food and bleach, the paint along the stair rail chipped from years of wear. Their apartment door stuck whenever it rained, and the hum of the radiator rattled through the night, like an old man's cough. Inside, space was a luxury. The kitchen doubled as a dining area. The living room doubled as Monica's bedroom, because she had given Ethan the only small bedroom in the unit. Bills, gas, electric, rent, stacked in neat but unopened piles on the counter. Monica tried to hide them under a floral plate, but Ethan noticed. He always noticed. That evening, Monica slipped into the apartment wearing her nurse aide scrubs, her feet dragging after a 16-hour double shift. She tried to smile when she saw Ethan rinsing dirt from his hands in the sink, but her eyes betrayed the exhaustion. "You worked hard today, didn't you?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "Mr. Harlow's yard is bigger than a whole park. But I'm going to make it look nice, Mom. You'll see." Monica kissed the top of his head, blinking back the sting of tears. He's just a boy, she thought, but he's already carrying the weight of a man. Later, as the city buzzed outside their window, Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor with his best friend Jaden. Jaden was 9, quick to laugh, and carried the kind of carefree energy Ethan only allowed himself in rare moments. They were scribbling superheroes in a torn notebook when a knock echoed at the door. It was Mrs. Cole, their elderly neighbor, who lived alone down the hall. She carried a tray of cornbread wrapped in foil. "Thought you two could use a warm bite," she said kindly, setting it on the table. "You're raising a good boy, Monica. A strong one." After she left, the apartment settled into its nighttime quiet, the city's sirens faint in the distance. That's when Ethan, pretending to be asleep, overheard his mother's hushed phone call. "I just don't know how long Mr. Harlow will let him work," Monica whispered into the receiver, her voice breaking. "He's just a child. What if tomorrow he decides Ethan isn't enough? What if he replaces him?" Ethan's heart clenched. Lying in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, he gripped his pillow tightly. He had to be good enough. He had to prove that even a 7-year-old could be trusted with a man's responsibility. And so, in the shadows of that small apartment, a seed of fear grew into determination, a determination that would soon push Ethan into a choice far beyond his years. By the third week at the Harlow estate, Ethan Carter had become a familiar sight on the grounds. The rake looked comically oversized in his hands, the pruning shears clumsy against the small fingers. But his determination was no joke. Every morning, he dragged his bag of tools down the winding stone paths, his little sneakers scuffing against the pristine drive, as if he'd been born to take care of the land. At first, the mansion staff had been skeptical. Clara, the housekeeper, had muttered under her breath, "This is no place for a child," as she watched him bend down to collect fallen leaves. Antonio, the Italian chef who ran the kitchen with a booming voice and quick laugh, raised his eyebrows every time Ethan wiped sweat off his brow with a dirt-streaked sleeve. And Marcus, the quiet driver with broad shoulders and a sharp jaw, shook his head when the boy tried to push the heavy mower across the endless grass. But something began to shift. Ethan never complained, never asked for breaks. When Clara brought out lemonade, he thanked her politely and went right back to clipping hedges. When Antonio teased, "You're going to turn into a tomato out here, piccolo giardinier," Ethan just grinned and kept working. Marcus, who hardly spoke to anyone, once caught Ethan dragging a bag of mulch that weighed almost as much as he did. Without a word, the driver took the other side of the bag and helped him carry it. From then on, the staff stopped seeing him as just a boy. They started calling him what he wanted most, the gardener. One late afternoon, Ethan stood back to admire a row of roses he had carefully pruned. Clara joined him, wiping her hands on her apron. "Looks like you've got the touch, kid. Maybe better than the last man Mr. Harlow hired." The compliment lit Ethan's face with pride. For the first time, he felt not like a child pretending to work, but like someone who belonged. Yet beneath that pride was a gnawing fear. As he pushed the mower along the back lawn, Ethan overheard two landscapers chatting beyond the hedge. "Don't get too comfortable. Harlow could hire a pro any day. A real gardener. Yeah, the kid's just a novelty. Someone older, stronger, someone qualified will replace him." The words lodged in Ethan's chest like stones. He gripped the mower tighter, his small arms trembling not from the weight, but from the thought. Replace me? The idea clawed at him as he stared at the sprawling grass stretching toward the horizon. That night, as the sun sank behind the mansion, Ethan lingered longer than usual, his little shadow cast across the perfect lawn. Pride battled fear inside him. He was the gardener now. But how long before that title slipped from his hands? It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, when the sun blazed against the marble walls of the Harlow estate, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass. Ethan was sweeping the walkway when he caught voices drifting from the far side of the garden. Two temporary landscapers, hired for a one-day project, leaned on their shovels, speaking low, but not low enough. "Kid's got heart," one said with a smirk. "But come on. Rich folks don't keep workers for long. They always find someone better, someone shinier." The other chuckled. "Exactly. A billionaire like Harlow. He could have a dozen professional gardeners tomorrow. This boy's just a phase." Ethan froze. His hands tightened around the broom handle until his knuckles whitened. Their words burrowed under his skin, replaying like a cruel echo. Replace phase, someone better. All the pride he had carried, the nickname the gardener, the compliments from Clara and Antonio, suddenly felt fragile, like glass that could shatter at the first wrong step. That night, back in the cramped apartment, Ethan lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, those words buzzing in his ears. His mother's breathing was steady in the next room, exhausted after another long shift. But Ethan couldn't sleep. The fear had turned into an idea, risky and reckless for a 7-year-old, but it rooted itself deep in his mind. He reached for the old cell phone his mom kept on the kitchen counter. The screen was scratched, the button stiff, but it worked. His tiny fingers trembled as he scrolled to the number Richard Harlow had given Monica in case of emergencies. He hesitated, whispering to himself, "I just need to know if I'm good enough." Taking a deep breath, Ethan pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice. Then a crisp voice answered. "Harlow." Ethan's heart nearly leapt from his chest. He cupped his hand over the phone, trying to disguise his voice, deepening it clumsily. Hello, sir. I heard you might need a gardener. I'm really good. I could do the job better than anyone." There was silence on the other end. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the rejection that would confirm his worst fear. Finally, Richard's voice cut through, firm and steady. "I don't need another gardener." Ethan's throat tightened. He almost hung up. But then Richard added something that made his breath catch. "I already have one, and he's the best I could ask for." Ethan's small chest swelled, tears stinging his eyes. He covered his mouth, afraid the sound of his shaky breathing would give him away. Richard's voice lowered, almost thoughtful now. No one could replace him. Click. Ethan ended the call quickly, his tiny hands trembling. He pressed the phone against his chest, his heart pounding in rhythm with it. Relief, pride, and disbelief swirled all at once. Yet even as his lips curled into the smallest smile, suspense lingered. Did Richard truly mean it? Or was it just something adults said? Richard Harlow's voice carried the weight of authority, even over the crackling phone line. Ethan, sitting cross-legged on his bed in the dim apartment, squeezed the old phone tighter. His disguise faltered, his words shaky but desperate. I could be a better gardener," he said, forcing his voice lower, trying to sound like someone older, someone stronger. "I can work harder than the kid you've got now. You won't regret it." The line went quiet. For a moment Ethan thought maybe Richard had hung up. His stomach twisted, every ounce of fear rising up at once. Then Richard's tone came, sharp but absolute. "I don't need another gardener." Ethan's chest caved. His tiny heart thudded painfully, the landscaper's cruel words echoing in his head. Replaceable. A phase. Just a kid. His lip trembled as he fought to keep his voice steady. But before he could speak, Richard continued. His voice softened, though still firm, carrying an undercurrent Ethan had never heard before. "I already have the best one." The words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. Ethan froze, his small hand gripping the sheets so tightly the fabric bunched under his fist. His throat ached, his eyes burned hot. The best one. He blinked hard, but tears spilled anyway, streaking down his cheeks. Richard's voice on the other end wasn't the rehearsed kindness adults used on children. It wasn't pity. It was conviction. "You can't replace him," Richard added quietly, almost to himself. "Not with anyone." Ethan clapped his free hand over his mouth to stifle the sob that broke loose. His chest heaved, his shoulders shaking as relief washed over him in waves. In that moment, he didn't feel small or unworthy. He felt seen. He felt enough. He ended the call abruptly, terrified Richard might recognize his voice if he stayed any longer. The silence of the room returned, broken only by the muffled sounds of traffic outside. Ethan pressed the phone to his chest, curling into himself like it was a shield. For the first time since he started working at the mansion, the fear of being replaced loosened its grip. But beneath the relief was something else, a gnawing question that made the tears flow even harder. Why? Why would a billionaire, a man who could hire anyone, say that about him? A boy with small hands, worn sneakers, and a second-hand rake? Suspense lingered in the darkness of the tiny room. Ethan didn't know it yet, but those words weren't just validation. They were a window into a truth Richard had kept locked away for years. The whispers started small. A laugh here, a sideways glance there. But soon, the rumors spread like ivy climbing the mansion's iron gates. "Why does Harlow keep a child as his gardener?" Clara overheard one of the caterers muttering during a weekend party. "It's not safe." "What's he thinking? Letting a boy handle grown men's work?" Another staff member shrugged, lowering her voice but not enough to hide the disdain. "Maybe it's charity. Or maybe he's just lost it. A billionaire, relying on a 7-year-old? It looks ridiculous." The staff didn't mean for Ethan to hear, but children have a way of catching what they shouldn't. One afternoon, as he carried clippings to the compost heap, their words floated to him, heavy as stones. He pretended not to notice, but his small shoulders stiffened, his steps slowed. It wasn't just inside the mansion. The neighbors, wealthy families with polished driveways and glass-walled pools, whispered louder. Ethan caught snippets whenever he walked home with his rake dragging along the sidewalk. Pathetic, isn't it? A kid working like some grown man. Where's the mother? Letting her boy do this kind of labor? Mark my words, Harlow's only keeping him around as a joke. Each word clung to Ethan like burrs. At night, lying awake in his cramped bedroom, he replayed them until they pressed against his chest like bricks. Still, every morning, he showed up at the gates of the Harlow estate with his tools, his head held high, trying to prove them all wrong with every stroke of the rake, every trimmed hedge, every flower planted with care. One evening, the whispers grew too loud to ignore. Ethan was kneeling by the rose bushes when he heard Marcus, the driver, arguing with a pair of staff who had been particularly cruel. "Enough!" Marcus snapped, his deep voice carrying across the courtyard. "The boy works harder than half of us here combined." The others scoffed. "He's still just a child. He doesn't belong in this kind of world." Before the argument could escalate, the air shifted. Richard Harlow himself appeared at the edge of the stone steps, his presence silencing the courtyard like a dropped gavel. His eyes cut through the gossipers with an authority that needed no words. For a moment, Ethan dared to hope his employer would speak up, declare to everyone that he wasn't a joke, that he was worthy. But Richard only gave a brief, unreadable glance and walked inside without comment. The staff quickly dispersed, murmuring apologies under their breath, and Marcus put a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. But the silence weighed heavier than any scolding could. That night, Ethan lay awake again, staring at the cracked ceiling of his apartment. He replayed the moment in the courtyard over and over. Richard's eyes had softened for a flicker, almost like he wanted to speak, but chose not to. Why? Ethan wondered, clutching his pillow. Why defend me in silence, but never in words? The suspense lingered. There was something Richard wasn't saying, something he was hiding behind that cold exterior. The sun over Westchester burned hotter than usual that July afternoon. The lawns shimmered under its weight, and even the seasoned mansion staff slowed their pace, dabbing sweat with towels. But Ethan, determined as ever, pressed on. He was bent over the rose beds, his tiny hands gripping the shears with stubborn precision. His shirt clung damp to his back, his curls plastered to his forehead. Clara had begged him to take a break, but Ethan shook his head, whispering, "If I stop, they'll think I can't handle it." Minutes later, the world tilted. Ethan blinked, his vision swimming, and then he crumpled to the ground, shears clattering, dirt puffing into the air. Clara screamed. Marcus dropped the car sponge he was holding and sprinted. Someone called Richard, and within minutes, Monica was racing up the stone driveway, her scrub still on, sneakers squeaking as she crossed the lawn. "Ethan," she cried, dropping to her knees, cradling her boy's head against her chest. His skin was clammy, his lashes fluttering weakly. The staff stood frozen, watching. And then Richard appeared, striding down the stone steps, his tailored suit jacket tossed over one shoulder, his face carved in an unreadable mask. Monica's head snapped toward him, eyes blazing. "What is wrong with you?" she shouted, her voice cracking with both fury and fear. "He's 7 years old, Richard. A boy. And you let him collapse in your yard like some hired hand." The courtyard fell silent, her words echoing against the marble walls. Ethan stirred faintly, whispering, "Mom, I'm okay." But Monica shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. Richard's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm, even edged with something dangerous. "Ethan insisted on this work. He's not here because I forced him. He's here because he wanted to prove something to himself." "Prove something?" Monica shot back, standing now, her hands trembling as she held her son close. "He's a child, not a man. He should be in a classroom, playing basketball with kids his age, not out here sweating in the dirt to impress you." The staff shifted nervously, as if witnessing a duel. Clara whispered, "Monica, please." But Monica didn't flinch. Richard took a step closer, his eyes locked on hers. For once, the cold mask slipped, replaced by raw fire. "Do not underestimate your son, Monica. He has more grit than grown men I've hired. He works not for me, but for his pride. You should see the way he cares for this place. He's not ordinary." Monica's lip trembled. "He's my son, and I will not let his pride kill him." Their words clashed like steel in the summer heat, pride against pride, love against a defense that sounded too personal, too invested. Richard's voice softened suddenly, almost breaking. "You don't understand," he murmured. "I'm not protecting him because he's just a worker. I'm protecting him because—" But he stopped himself, the words vanishing into the heavy silence. Monica narrowed her eyes, suspicion flickering. "Because what, Richard?" But Richard only looked away, his jaw set again, his secrets intact. As the paramedics arrived and lifted Ethan gently onto a stretcher, the suspense thickened. Why was Richard Harlow, this untouchable billionaire, so fiercely protective of her son? The night was still. For once, the sprawling Harlow estate was quiet. No clinking glasses from upstairs dinners, no engines purring in the driveway, just silence. Ethan lay asleep in the guest house infirmary, and Ford dripping steadily into his arm, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. Monica sat at his bedside, her head bowed, exhaustion pulling heavy at her shoulders. Richard stood at the doorway, hands deep in his pockets. For minutes, he said nothing, only watched, the weight of years pressing into the lines of his face. Finally, Monica lifted her gaze, her voice hoarse. "Why him, Richard? Out of all the gardeners, out of all the people you could hire, why my son?" Richard exhaled slowly, stepping into the room. He lowered himself into the chair across from her, his sharp businessman's composure faltering, replaced by something raw and almost vulnerable. "Because he reminds me of me," he said at last. Monica frowned. Richard's voice grew quieter, deeper, carrying a heaviness rarely heard from a billionaire who ruled boardrooms with iron certainty. "I wasn't born into this," he admitted. "People look at me now and see the empire, the suits, the house. But when I was Ethan's age, I didn't even have shoes that fit. My father left when I was 5. My mother worked herself into the ground cleaning houses so I could eat. I carried bags, shoveled snow, mowed lawns, anything to keep us going." His eyes flicked toward Ethan's small, sleeping figure. "When I look at him, I see myself. The same grit, the same fire, the same refusal to give up, no matter how unfair the world feels. That's why I couldn't replace him. That's why I defended him, even when the world laughed." Monica's eyes softened but stayed guarded. "That can't be the whole reason." Richard swallowed hard. For a moment, silence returned. Then, almost reluctantly, he pulled back the final layer of armor. "There's more," he admitted. "I knew his father." Monica stiffened. "You what?" Richard nodded, his expression shadowed with memories. "David Carter. We met years ago. He was working security for one of my firms during its early days. We weren't close, but I respected him. He carried himself like a man who'd do anything for his family. The last time I saw him, he spoke about his boy, about Ethan, like he was his whole world." Richard's voice cracked, just slightly. 2 months later, I heard he died in that car accident. I didn't go to the funeral. I buried myself in work instead. But when I first saw Ethan here, in my yard with those shears bigger than his hands, it hit me like a punch to the chest. I wasn't just looking at my younger self. I was looking at David's son. Monica pressed her hands to her mouth, her eyes welling. "I didn't tell you," Richard continued, "because I didn't want it to seem like pity. Ethan doesn't need pity. He needs someone to recognize what he already is, a fighter. That's why I never replaced him. That's why I couldn't." The room seemed to tremble with the truth. Monica's tears fell silently as she looked at Richard, no longer the cold billionaire, but a man haunted by loss, carrying the ghost of her husband and the reflection of his own childhood in the little boy sleeping between them. For the first time, Monica didn't see Ethan's job as a mark of desperation, but as a bridge between past and present, between pain and resilience, between a billionaire and a boy who refused to give up. The morning after Richard's confession, sunlight spilled over the manicured lawns, brushing golden light against the mansion windows. The air felt different, lighter, as though a burden had lifted. Ethan sat propped up on the guesthouse porch steps, sipping orange juice. Monica insisted he drink slowly. His small hands cradled the glass as if it were precious. The garden stretched before him, lush and alive, every blade of grass shimmering with dew. He smiled weakly. His garden. Richard approached quietly. His usual commanding stride softened. He paused for a moment, studying Ethan, so small, yet carrying a weight most men twice his age couldn't bear. When Ethan noticed him, he straightened, his little chest puffing with pride. "Mr. Harlow," Ethan said, voice still raspy. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall down." Richard knelt in front of him, resting one hand on his knee. His sharp eyes held no judgment this time, only warmth. "Ethan, listen to me. You don't have to prove yourself to anyone. Not to me. Not to the staff. Not to the neighbors. You've already proven more than I ever expected." Ethan blinked, confused. "So, are you going to fire me?" Richard shook his head with a rare smile. "Fire you? No. I'm going to do the opposite. I want to mentor you. Not just as a gardener, but as a young man who deserves opportunity. I'll pay for extra tutoring, books, anything you need. You'll still work here if you want, but part-time. The rest of your time should be spent in school, building the future I know you're capable of." Ethan's mouth fell open. His heart raced. You really mean it?" "I do," Richard said firmly. "Because one day, you won't just care for gardens. You'll grow something bigger. A life. A legacy." Monica, who had been listening from the porch, pressed a hand to her lips. Relief and gratitude mingled with pride. For the first time in years, she felt hope steady her bones. Ethan set his glass down and stood, his knees still shaky, but his spirit strong. "I want to keep gardening too. Not just because of the money, but because I like it. When I plant something, it grows. When I cut the weeds, the flowers breathe again. It makes me feel like I'm worth something." Richard's throat tightened. He nodded, his voice low. "Then we'll make sure you never forget that." The boy and the billionaire stood there, side by side, the mansion towering behind them, the garden stretching before them like a promise. And in that moment, it wasn't about wealth or poverty, status or gossip. It was about a boy who refused to break, and a man who saw himself in those small, determined hands. As the camera of life pulled back, the narrator's words lingered like the final brushstroke of a masterpiece. Sometimes the smallest hands hold the biggest truths. And sometimes, the poorest gardener waters the richest lessons of life.